Well, I want to formally welcome you to this webinar. I am Sandra Scheinbaum. I'm the founder and CEO of FMCA, and I'm so glad that you are here. And would love to know where you're from. Feel free to use the chat to let us know. And I want to introduce Scott Hawksworth. Scott is our Director of Marketing and Sales, but he is here today as a dad. And we are going to be talking about his results from him, from his family, from his twins. And I am a grandma of twin toddlers. So I am very, very interested in this webinar as well. And we have as our very special guest from Tiny Health, Cheryl Sew Hoy. And I got to interview Cheryl a few months back when we did a podcast. And I just love the work that they are doing, and you're going to hear all about it. And you are going to see an actual interpretation of results. We did the microbiome testing on Scott's twin babies. So I'm going to turn it over to Cheryl and Scott to take it away and start the webinar.
Once again, hi, I'm Scott, and I'm a father of three, actually. So I have a 5-year-old daughter, and then, almost a year ago, my wife, we had twins, and they were brought into the world via C-section. My Noah, he was, what was he? Was it transverse? He just didn't feel like moving. He was posted up, and so when we went to the hospital, we had kind of hoped that maybe he would move around, and he just didn't. And they were like, okay, we're going to need to go right into a C-section, which was different than our first, where my wife gave birth vaginally to our first. So that whole experience was wild, and it was just so different. We had kind of Noah had some complications, so he had to actually spend a day in the NICU. And so different things like skin to skin, we didn't go right to that as early as we did with my first Charlotte. And there was just, we didn't get him, either of them, I think, on the breast as soon as we did with Charlotte, and different kinds of things like that. So it was just a different experience. And also, I would add, with twins, my wife breastfed pretty much exclusively our first, but with twins, that is just really, really hard. And while she did breastfeed, we almost immediately had to start supplementing with formula. And I think I know many parents, there's all sorts of questions around breastfed versus not, and formula questions. And so I think these were some of the things that started coming up for me when I came across Tiny Health and saw that great interview between Sandy and Cheryl. And I got to thinking, I'd love to know more about my children's health and their gut and what's going on there, especially and at the time that we did this test. We're starting to introduce solids, and we're still doing that. We're kind of ramping it up. And I think with all of that, what do they say? What do we say here at FMCA? Food is medicine. And as a parent, and we have 2 working parents, okay, how do we make sure we're getting all the right foods and eat the rainbow and everything? Really just a whole process there with a lot of questions. And in terms of collecting it, it was pretty straightforward. The twins were nice and obliged by providing some dirty diapers. And I think the big thing, yeah, there you go. That was the swab. And I think the big thing I was really stressed about was getting the right amount, not too much, but not too little. And so kind of like getting the swab there. But it was really quite simple, a lovely kit. As a marketer, Cheryl, I just have to compliment how the kit came. I just nerd out about things like that. And it was really easy to kind of take the sample, put it back in exactly. And then I went on the Tiny Health website, was able to put in the numbers for the sample and send it off, and we got the results.
Yeah. And I have the instructions here. I think
Yes.
the, like, you can't do too much, not too little, just right, but it's should be pretty easy to just like kind of touch the stool from the diaper, or for an older kid or an adult, you can sample directly from a toilet paper, which makes it easy. Traditionally, if you've taken a stool test, a PCR stool test, you poo into this French fry thing, and then you kind of you have to collect this much, which for an infant, sometimes you really don't get that much stool. In fact, some labs make you collect 2 vials, which is quite a lot. We have an adult pro version that has these additional stool markers. So we actually do sell these too for advanced testing. You have to have certain practitioner licenses for that. But yeah, it goes back to saying that we do support stool testing for all ages, not just babies. But the reason why we're here to talk about your twins and your babies is because it's such an innovative test that, you know, no one else has in the market for under 3. Most PCR stool tests are for 3 and above. And what we consider an adult range, because the gut of the child matures into adult-like by the time they're 3, well, 3 to 5, there's a transitional stage that Tiny Health is actually leading the charge in defining that 3 to 5 transitional stage before it's fully adult-like. But that's kind of why most tests in the market you see are for 3 and above. So going back very briefly to my story, which is very similar to your wife's story, except that my first child, Charlie, she was a C-section born baby. She was breached. So not transverse, but breached. And I labored. I chose to go through labor instead of scheduling a C-section because I knew that there were benefits to labor. And going back to the signs of it, the fetus is actually sterile in the womb. There was some contention around, oh, is there a microbiome in the mom's womb for the baby, the fetus? Pretty much we've shown or like there's papers published that there is no microbiome, and the major event that seeds the infant's microbiome is the water releasing. When the water breaks, that's when the baby in the kind of birth canal, you know, and on the way out, they're kind of swallowing that fluid, the vaginal fluid. So they first get seeded with mom's vaginal microbiome. So the vaginal microbiome of the mom is actually quite crucial in this equation to be healthy and in an acidic state. So you want it to be lactobacillus dominant. And we have a stool test for mom for prenatal to check on the vaginal microbiome to make sure that's healthy. And then some fecal fluid during the laboring process also gets swallowed by the baby. It's so close, you know, the anus is so close to the vagina for a good reason, for birth. And, you know, nature has its way of like seeding the baby with those things. So that's kind of like the what's expected of a normal like vaginal birth. And that's where babies get most of mom's microbes, a combination of vaginal microbes, which disappears very quickly. And by day 7, by 1 week, you don't really see the vaginal microbes seeding baby's gut anymore. Sometimes you do, but most of it is then taken over by the mom's gut microbes through that initial birthing, labor, colonization, and then breast milk. If the mom is breastfeeding, she's actually continuing to transfer these gut microbes from her gut through the breast milk to the infant, which is fascinating science. So this whole progression could be disrupted by a C-section or other interventions like vacuum forceps and things like that. So in my case, from a, you know, reading the impact of C-section is, and the reason why it impacts the infant gut is because when they're not birthing through the vaginal canals, they're missing the vaginal microbes and also potentially the gut microbes, right? So what makes up the infant gut in the early days of a C-section baby are mostly hospital bugs, antibiotic resistant, maybe from the skin or environment of the hospital, more skin of the doctor or mom, dad in the hospital environment. And so that is one factor. The other factor is that baby is probably exposed to mom's antibiotics from the operations, because obviously you're kind of, with operations, mom's given antibiotics, and that directly gets absorbed into baby's system too. So they do have, at birth, if you measure like the 1 week or 1 month old gut from a vaginally born versus a C-section born gut, there's various papers showing it's quite different. And so I was reading those things and I'm like, okay, what does that mean for the infant's health? And, my whole journey, which is kind of my webinar with Sandra earlier on, was describing how the early colonization impacts baby's lifelong immune training. So, if we kind of now know that 70–80% of our immune system lives in our gut, and we get it from our mom through the initial process, what seeds baby in these early days, in the first few months, first few years of life, is quite crucial, because these bugs, and more specifically, the balance between specific beneficial microbes like bifidobacteria and Archimencia, and versus like maybe more destructive microbes like E. coli and whatnot, Klebsiella, the balance between the two really trains the baby's immune system. So what happens if there isn't the right balance in the early months of life are chronic conditions, specifically atopic March conditions. So atopic March is an allergic progression of allergic diseases that typically starts with eczema between 3 to 6 months. Most commonly at 6 months, when you start salt introduction triggers a response to dietary allergens. And then if the kid has eczema, they are also more likely then to have food allergies between 6 to 2 years of age, 6 months to 2 years of age. And then that could progress into asthma, respiratory allergen, or like, a reaction to respiratory allergens between 3 to 6 years of age. So it's kind of this progression. And then hay fever is also kind of part of that journey. Some kids have hay fever before asthma, some kids have it after or into adulthood. So it's kind of an indication, these progression of allergic diseases is an indication that their immune system wasn't trained correctly by the right balance of microbes in early life. So when I read those papers, I'm like, oh no, like, what is her risk? There's something called a C-section signature. So how many antibiotic resistant bugs versus vaginally, like babies or bugs found in vaginally born babies, the ratio between the two. So there's a paper published by Stockholm, this scientist, that shows by 1 year of age, most C-section born babies, the C-section index has gone down and they look more like vaginally born babies through, breastfeeding and things like that can course correct. You can course correct an infant's gut. But there is a small percentage of C-section born infants whose C-section signature remains high at 1 year of age, and their risk for asthma is 3 to 4x. So I was, when I read that paper, I was like, how would I know what my daughter's C-section index is at 1 year? Am I, at 6 months, am I kind of maturing her gut towards lowering her risk for atopic conditions and asthma, or am I not? Because she did get eczema at 6 months when we started solids, quite, bad eczema. And then not food allergies, but food sensitivities. She got, she had some sesame sensitivity, but also gluten and dairy intolerance and things like that. So I knew that my immune system wasn't quite in the right shape. And so I was really trying to de-risk her. And there was no test in the market for infants specifically or kids, that I wanted to also use this technology called shotgun metagenomic sequencing, which is a new technology, next-gen sequencing tool that is being used by all the latest publications in microbiome, academic research. So they're not using PCR or culturing anymore because that shows you a very limited panel, what's going on in the gut. I wanted to use shotgun because it can measure strains, because the different strains were, we talk about species, strain goes to the next level resolution. So we now know that different strains perform different functions. So I wanted to look at that. I wanted to look at the function of the microbial environment in the gut, not just the microbes that are there, but what they're actually doing. So using shotgun, you're able to see these two things. So there was no test in the market for that. And I was like, this is so foundational for my child's lifelong health. How do we not look into it when the window to course correct is in that first few years of life, but more importantly, the first few months or the first year of life, based on that C-section index, kind of lowering that risk in that first year. And there were, more importantly, a lot of interventions that one can do to course correct. And the infant gut is very malleable. So if something was really off in the infant's gut, a lot of parents freak out when they see 0 beneficial bacteria in their infant's gut in that first year and all unfriendly. It's not a good picture to see, right? But we always try to reassure them that, it's very easy to change it. It's very malleable. And it's very driven by diet, which is milk, breast milk, or formula, and more specifically, the HMOs, or human milk oligosaccharides, that makes up 1/3 of the breast milk composition. So HMOs are like prebiotic fibers for the beneficial bacteria. So if you want beneficial bacteria to kind of colonize and stick around and push out unfriendly bacteria, then you kind of need food for the probiotic, right? So probiotics are not enough. You need the prebiotic, which then comes from mom's breast milk. Then there's that question, like with formula feeding, there's no HMOs in most formula, and even formulas who market HMOs don't disclose how much there is in formula. It's usually just a marketing thing. It's very like minimal. So you might need to add an HMO supplement if you are formula feeding to make sure that when you do have the right probiotics in your infant's gut, it's colonizing. But there's so much nuance towards it because you only need it if you don't have it, your child doesn't have it, and you don't want to over supplement too. So at Tiny Health, our approach isn't we don't believe everyone needs a probiotic or every child needs a probiotic. It really depends if they're missing those strains, because we know that the native strains from mom is actually superior because nature has its way of designing maybe what should be there most of the time, not all the time. It really does depend on the mom's gut health as well. So we also usually highly recommend that the mom checks in her gut health during pregnancy, even before trying to conceive, even postpartum if she's breastfeeding, because we want to know the state of the mom's gut as she's passing on her gut microbes to her babies, right? So if mom is actually deficient of certain strains of bifidobacteria, which is the important thing to colonize the baby's gut, then even through a vaginal birth, not even a C-section, even through a vaginal birth and breast milk, infant may not be getting any bifidobacteria, right? So sometimes we see parents also being shocked. I did everything right, vaginal birth, breast milk, blah, blah, blah. Why is my infant gut like deficient completely of bifidobacteria? Well, then when we have mom sample, mom completely had no bifidobacteria in her gut. And, sometimes it's like, hard for us to explain why, but that was my case with my second child. Was a home birth, vaginally born, VBAC. And I thought, okay, great. This time I had it all right. I breastfed for 2.5 years. But guess what? I had no bifidobacteria. And I was like, but I eat so healthy now. And everyone tells us, oh, I eat so healthy. And I'm like living the non-toxic, clean life, yada, yada, yada. But then what I learned going through my own journey was that I was given antibiotics in early life, for certain things. And I, at the time, my parents didn't, restore it, because if you don't actively restore some of these bugs, like bifidobacteria, Akkermansia, are very sensitive to antibiotics. So if you do a round of antibiotics and it's depleted, if you're not consciously restoring it, it may just be gone forever. So that to keep in mind for the adults, like, Scott, maybe, you want to check in if you have the bifs, if you've had any prior antibiotics in your early life. And then my diet in my 20s was horrible too. So it's kind of, again, there's so many factors that could deplete that beneficial bacteria. If you don't restore it, you may not even have it as your baseline, right? So yeah, something to keep in mind. But yeah, I'll kind of pause here. I just wanted to give everyone the context, a little bit of my own story and how I came about this, and also how the infant gut is so important for lifelong immune training, where it comes from, and how you can actually course correct.
That's fantastic, Cheryl. And I just want to add, just from a health coaching context, just as a parent, as you're saying that, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is, so powerful. And then I start feeling that like anxiety, like, oh gosh, can I get there in time? How can we course correct if we need to? These are the kinds of things that health coaches can really support parents in, if lifestyle changes need to be made, how do you go about that? How do you stick to it? So really, really fascinating. And then one question came up as you were talking, Cheryl. So for my son, Noah, specifically, he spent some time in the NICU because what happened is, my wife's, the placenta tore while or I guess while she was in labor or what have you. And he ingested a lot of her blood. And that's why they had to go take him to the NICU to sort of monitor and make sure that it all passed through. And so as you're talking through that, I'm like, gosh, how might that impact a microbiome if he specifically had that happen? Fortunately, Eliza did not, but yeah.
Yeah, fascinating. So maybe we can dive into your twins sample, and I can walk through how I would evaluate it as like a health coach. We actually do and Tiny Health have a team of what we call microbiome specialists that each test that a consumer purchases comes with. Like, so consumer pricing is $249. It comes with a coaching call. Two of our specialists are actually FMCA trained health coaches, and they're one of our, better coaches. So that, and then there's a practitioner rate too. If you're a practitioner practicing, it comes without the consult call. So let me just share my screen if you're ready for me to compare your twin sample.
I'm ready. I'm so excited. I didn't want to spoil anything, so I kind of only glanced at them.
Okay. All right. I was going to ask, if you understood your results or how you walked through it. Can you see the comparison between the two?
I can.
Okay. Sorry, I couldn't hide your email.
Screen.
I'm exposing your email a little bit.
That's okay. That's my work email.
Okay, great. All right. So they were sampled, I just noticed, actually a few days apart.
Yes.
And actually there was the C-section index actually was a different range, because we actually have a new range for 9-month-old. And I think Noah was like at the 9-month-old, and then Eliza was at the 3 to 6 month or 6 to 9 month. This is one of the special things about a test, is actually the reference range changes slightly as the baby ages, because this is the work we did over 2 years of R&D, mapping out the very quick changes, because the baby's gut, remember I said, is malleable in the first few years of life, especially the first 6 months of life. The earlier, the more rapid the changes. So I'll walk through that C-section index, but it's very minor. So yeah, at a high level, I did go through their survey. We do ask a survey, so I kind of knew about the C-section and the NICU and all that. I did not know that Noah had spent time in the NICU and Eliza didn't. Is that right? Is that what you said?
That's correct.
Okay.
So Noah had been in NICU, but not Eliza.
Right. So it's interesting. His score is just very slightly higher than Eliza. But it's interesting. In your health rating, you rated Noah 9 and you rated Eliza 8. I don't know if you remember.
I did do that. I think because I was going on Eliza seeming to struggle more like with getting more illnesses and getting over a cough and things like that.
Yeah.
Noah seems to be, he's been larger than Eliza the whole time. He's been a tank in terms of how he eats. And so I guess, I don't know, maybe there's parent bias there, but maybe
I
I
don't know,
felt like
but
he's tidier.
when I looked at his results, if you didn't tell me all this, he actually has a lower maturation, which is what we want to see a little bit in the early days. So, this is something we just launched. Like, we can predict with fairly good accuracy what your child's microbiome age is. So here, I know it's 8+, but we predicted Noah and Eliza's gut pretty accurately.
Yeah.
In fact, Eliza has slightly higher maturation than Noah, which is not a problem. It's still within range. This is largely driven by things like C-section can accelerate maturation a little bit. Formula feeding certainly can. So if they were exclusively formula fed without any breast milk, this would shoot up pretty high. And, even early introduction of solids before 4 months and such, you'll see their infant gut prematurely accelerating the maturation, and that could be connected with obesity and metabolic health issues later in life. So here we see them pretty close to each other. It's the more breast milk, I would say, and the lower diversity, which is what we want in the early life, the lower the maturation, which kind of we see very slightly lower maturation in Noah's gut. But sort of like I'll maybe just click in quickly for you to see, so nothing here to do because they're fine. But it sounds like they were both breastfed for about 6 months, right?
Yeah.
Some supplementation. And to note here, even if the mom was supplementing with formula, but primarily breastfed, we see that maturation suppressed by the breast milk, which is a good thing again. And then when they do start solids, we actually do want to see this maturation taking off. So sometimes if the child is starting solids a little bit slower, we see, like you need to speed up allergen introduction and maturation because you want it to be very low in the first 6 months because the primary diet of the infant is just milk, breast milk or formula. So higher with formula, lower with breast milk, which is what we want. And then post weaning, we see that taking off and high maturation. But you kind of want it, again, this is scientifically referenced from what is kind of the trajectory that we want to see that's healthy. So I'll just, back out because I thought that was pretty interesting. So the way I like to walk through the results is this is the dashboard of what everyone would get if you're a baby or a child or an adult. We have a high level score to tell you where you're doing, so obviously Noah could be better in the green, but I would say this is kind of, there's some work to be done, but it's not terrible. I mean, given his circumstances, right? It's pretty good, So then here, like you can click into reading the high priority, but I would just walk you through. This is a good place to start just to see kind of what's the top things to focus on. And it's very interesting that your kids have pretty similar top thing to focus on, which is fragilis, which is kind of associated with constipation. So I'm not sure if any of your kids have that sign yet.
We've a little bit. It hasn't been too bad. My first definitely had some constipation issues, but we haven't noticed anything crazy with them just yet.
So something to keep an eye on, it could be, like we always think that the gut is the leading indicator before symptoms actually do exist. And you kind of, it's a precursor, right? When you do have symptoms like, it's already kind of pervasive in a way. So it's just something to watch. Again, I wouldn't worry or freak out about it, but just, there are things that you can do to lower this. Which, there's a long list here of what you can do, specific probiotics you can take. This B. longum BB536 has been clinically shown with actual published papers to lower fragilis in the gut. So, I'll kind of back out later. And then there's dietary actions and lifestyle changes that one can do. I know it's a long list, but someone can just kind of pick, some of it is just a guide and, like how do you introduce allergens and foods, first foods, what you were concerned about earlier, just some resources for you here. That's, an allergen powders if you want to speed it up a little bit more. Just a lot of helpful resources, but sometimes there's very specific supplements that we would recommend to target specific microbes that are a little bit high in abundance compared to what we normally see in a healthy developing infant gut, for example. So that's one example. I don't want to go too deep into that for now, but let me just back out again. That's where you go to start, I would say. But how we organize this dashboard is by kind of pointing out the top three things that are red, that are in that red range. And then the yellow is kind of then the next optional steps. So I would target the red stuff to tackle first, and then the yellow stuff. Otherwise, some people might have a lot and it feels overwhelming on what to do first, right? So I would target, the ones that need support. We do have an action plan here. So you can quickly click on the left nav to just see all the things that are recommended for the reds. And then once you get through that, you can work on the next things in the yellow, and then maybe some additional resources down here.
And to be clear, sorry, this would be Noah. So it's like, okay, I want like to consider a probiotic for Noah.
Yeah. Your twins are twins. They
Right.
have very similar guts, and I'll walk you out. I analyzed them already. Like literally, it could be from the same person.
That's really cool.
But they diverge once they grow up, and if they're going to different schools, eating different diets, or I'm sure that will be a long time away before they start diverging paths. Their guts will mirror their lifestyle, right? Their diet and their living environment. They get the same amount of kisses from mom and dad. So probably, however, we've seen with twin samples where one was vaginally born first and the second one was C-section born, then we see differences in their gut at birth, which is fascinating. So given, I think the two of them were C-section born.
Yeah, both were C-section.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so then I want to see then backing up, like, can we see some NICU impact in Noah, but not Eliza, right? So we'll back up to that. But, high level, we break it down by, and this is how it would be useful for, like if you do have a patient, you're walking through like a health coaching session, you want to see what the problem areas are in a summary. Like we see that there's not really any beneficial microbes in question here. Sometimes if it's all kind of a lot of reds, then, they don't have enough beneficial bacteria. That's maybe something to like work on. Here we see a couple of microbes that are red. So we want to double click into that later to see which ones could be causing problem. Under 3, we don't really have gut inflammation. It's something to keep track of, but it really isn't relevant until 3 years and above. This is our leaky gut indicator. Leaky gut is a heavy word, but basically your gut lining and, do you have, good gut barrier integrity? The reason why for infants this isn't relevant is because infants are born without a gut barrier, actually, because you want the kind of microbial training, right? So it's permeable. The gut lining is actually permeable in the first few months of life. So like, again, a lot of science there I won't go into. And then the short chain fatty acids that you want to see in early life are mostly acetate high in the first 6 months of life and butyrate low. And then when they start solids, this is kind of like at 9 months, you do want to see butyrate high and acetate still relatively high because there's probably still some milk involved. So we see that they're both kind of very similar here, and acetate needs a little bit more help, but their butyrate function is pretty good, which indicates that they're eating, like diverse enough solids. Short chain fatty acids is very important in infancy, and it changes for into adulthood. Digestion absorption markers, we focus on HMOs here, and this actually is what I mentioned earlier, driven by breast milk and breastfeeding. And they look like they all have very healthy amounts, which then encourages the bifidobacteria to stick around. And
That's going to make my wife feel very good. She's going to be very happy with that. That's great.
Yeah. So normal breast milk will have like 200-300 types of HMOs. We only point out, we have this grouping here. But if the infant was exclusively formula feeding, we see this very low usually. So it's a sign they need to add an HMO supplement, for example. So
And
Yeah,
by the way, to your point with the as you were talking about the formula, I know on our formula can it says, HMOs, but it's just an interesting factor that, it might be more marketing than that, and really
yeah.
where we're getting a lot of it is the breast milk.
Look out for the volume, and then there are infant approved HMO supplements. Like we love one from Begin Health. They have an infant approved one. And then for kids a year above, if they are having some constipation issues, and because we saw the fragile is high in your twins,
Yeah.
when 1 year I would switch to the Begin Health with inulin, because then that could help with the constipation bit. But again, like only if they need it. I wouldn't supplement if they don't need it.
There's
So
been a few nights where I remember Eliza, she was like working on something and it was tough. I had to be up with
it's
her.
it's
So
good
I'll
to
keep
have
an eye on
them.
it.
It's good to have them on hand. Yeah, especially if moms wean them from breast milk. If breast milk
Yeah.
is there in any bits of amount, one serving of breast milk is equivalent to one, I think not even maybe one serving of HMO. So if you're breastfeeding, I would say you don't really need HMO supplements at all. Um, so coming back here, this is like where you can really see, this is the power of shotgun sequencing versus a PCR test, which gives you a very small panel of what's in a person's gut. This one, you can actually see that, overall, Noah's gut has 3% unfriendly. Eliza has 2%. So he does have slightly more unfriendly bacteria, and 66% by and large, pretty benefit. Oh, it's up here summarized for you. And then variable is just something that is very common in the person's gut, but you don't want it to be in the top species, because if you have an overabundance of some of these, then it's kind of linked to, I know it sounds really terrible here, but most commonly in kids, it's constipation here. And
Mhm.
everything that we list in the test is linked to a PubMed article. So it's very evidence-based, and that's why practitioners and coaches and families love using our tests. It's all based off of evidence. And there's so much evidence that B. infantis is really the most important strain of bifidobacteria for an infant in the first year of life. So it's really great to see that Noah and Eliza both have this as their top species. And Eliza does have B. longum too, which is, we saw that your wife was taking a line probiotic during
Yes.
pregnancy, and that is primarily, they have B. longum in it. So I wonder if some of this came from her probiotic. It is the second most abundant species in Eliza and third in Noah. But the B. infantis must have come from her. So if we
Yeah.
have your wife's gut, we actually do a seeding comparison for how many microbes mom and baby share in the first 6 months. So we can attribute it to, if not a vaginal birth, then breast milk, it could come through the breast milk. Or sometimes if mom is completely deficient of these microbes, but somehow baby had it, dad can actually be found, can contribute to it. So
Wow.
it could seed baby from dad or older siblings. Your Charlotte, if she had B. infantis, and let's just say your wife and you didn't have it, somehow Charlotte had it, she can pass it on to her siblings if she's kissing and sharing food and just being in the same household
She's
environment.
doing all that. So yeah.
So I would be curious if you had Charlotte's sample of any one of your samples, if we see the same strain of B. infantis there, where the twins got it from. Because they certainly didn't get it from a C-section. So they
Yeah.
probably either got it from the breast milk or from you guys, right? So anyway, it's pretty kind of like, can kind of scroll down to see. It's interesting that, sometimes you just want to see all the full list of what's unfriendly. And a lot of it, when I was digging into last night, some of it is connected to, like, are resistant to antibiotics, or found in preterm babies, which I think your kids
Both of them were, yeah.
are, and some of them are connected with C-section birth specifically. So you do see some signs of a kind of microbes that are connected to that, but not too concerning, because they're by and large pushed out, which is what we want to see. So
Cheryl, I had a quick question. So we have 3 cats at home, and we
Mhm.
don't live in like a huge house. So the cats are milling about and with the kids. I'm curious. Are there any indicators for that? I know lots of parents have pets and different
Yeah.
things, and sometimes it says, "Oh, it's great, to have pets because those kids have more hardy immune systems, yada yada." I'm just kind
Yeah.
of curious if any of that's showing up here.
Yeah, it's hard to say, but I think it will show up more when they are maybe like Charlotte's age in diversity, because in the early ages, you actually want low diversity, as I mentioned, to for an infant's gut. So like, for example, coming back to the microbiome breakdown, um, oh, sorry, we just launched a new indicator. So species, okay. So at 9 months, Noah has 149 bugs that we detected, and Eliza is pretty close to it. So you kind of want lower, like, in the vaginal birth, say in the week, you might only see 10 bugs, and that's actually very healthy. So you want low diversity. And as I mentioned, post solid introduction, post 6 months, and post weaning too, you want to see that taking off to, like, if you did a stool test, Scott, or, you and I would have about 300-400, maybe 500, and the more the better. So you want to increase.
Right.
So obviously this is a very immature gut where they're only like at 140, right? And just now the microbiome breakdown, you see all the 149 species. So the cat and the dog is partially helping with species richness because they're going out and bringing the dirt, good, healthy dirt out inside. Remember, we
Yeah.
used to live in farms and go out in nature a lot back in the day. Now we spend 90% of our time indoors, which is not a great thing. So in a way, the papers that show why pets, specifically dogs and cats, because they do go out and come back in, is because they actually help us diversify. They bring the nature to us, or you walk them, you go out with them, right? And so ideally, like, you are spending that time outside and you're getting that diversity, and having your kids actually play outside will increase this as they grow up. But hopefully that answers your question.
That
Um,
does, that does. And I know that I just wanted to point out, it looks like we've got some other questions coming in. So I'm curious if you have anything else to share,
yeah,
and then
so
we can
quickly
kind of
I'll
open it
walk
up to the
through.
audience here.
So the main thing that's really, really important in infant gut is bifidobacteria. We want to see 50 to 90% in the first year. So again, kind of like, B. infantis is the most important. We see a huge diversity in your child's gut. So I usually, when we see this much diversity, it's coming from mom, like these kind of weird species I've never seen before. Like, I think probably from her, which is great. But sometimes the infant's gut might have mostly adolescentist like these are actually adult bifidobacteria. So they don't actually belong in an infant gut, and they don't do much for increasing acetate production or degrading HMOs in mom's breast milk. So the type does matter. We actually want to see these top four are the ideal ones we want to see in an infant, dominating their gut. The ones on the bottom, not so much. But as they get more solids, it is healthy to see diversity, a diversity of it. So I want to quickly point that out, how important that is. And then the other thing we want to look towards is Archimencia by 1 year of age. Noah and Eliza should have some. This is important for allergy prevention and also metabolic health, gut lining. So most infants don't have it, but this is where I would also want to check in the mom and dad to see if they have it, because if they have it, they can pass it on to their kids. So another keystone taxa. And then I quickly want to go through the unfriendly microbes. Double click here. That is sort of like, we do see like a few more unfriendly bacteria in Eliza's gut. But the thing I wanted to point out is we have strain function here for staph. I saw that they actually have this toxin type A, which I click into E. coli, I didn't see any toxic strains. So this one is in a way common, not like as rare, but not as common either. And it is kind of one of those that are skin indicated. So watch for eczema or any skin issues, rashes here. If they don't have it, maybe this is just not, impactful, because they could have this toxin, but it's also epigenetics, right? What else you do in your lifestyle. So seems like this is not really impacting them. They don't have eczema, right? They don't have any.
No, not that I've
Yeah.
seen.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So I kind of like, again, it's something interesting. You can look into it here. But typically we find it more in people who have skin issues. I have
I
this.
have eczema, if that is relevant.
So yeah, maybe, I don't know if maybe this came from you or whatnot. You want to check in and see how you
Interesting.
can then kind of do some of these actions to help lower that risk. So very useful information for deep diving. Again, we like take the approach of, symptoms trump everything, symptoms and conditions. So the gut test is just one way, one mechanism to deep dive into what could be contributing. And sometimes, in the early days, you do want to be proactive about course correcting before symptoms happen. But if their gut by and large looks good and you have some of these small little bugs that are a little bit higher, but they're not so irritated and not so bothered by it, then I wouldn't freak out in a way, like emotionally. I wouldn't be too concerned, but I would start working on, okay, what can I do to like support that high Klebsiella, which is again connected with eczema actually. And so sort of like, do I need maybe just a very short course of bifidobacteria to push some of the unfriendly out? We wouldn't do 5 months supplementation. I would do just very short courses. And this is what a health coach would kind of like walk a parent through, is that, because and the reason why you shouldn't take a probiotic ongoing is because, remember I said you want diversity to happen at a certain point. If you're taking the probiotic and prebiotic or breastfeeding, then this B. infantis could be overpowering and suppressing diversity when it actually should be blooming, right? So that's kind of why you really want to be very targeted, especially in the first year of life, with probiotics and prebiotics, and take it only if you need it. And
Surgical changes rather than just full scale.
yes, and check in, and if it's kind of meet its purpose, is push out the Klebsiella and some of these high bugs, then I would stop, frankly. So yeah, like, most kids have C. diff, nothing to be concerned about. People freak out about that a lot too. But it's not, too alarming, and we would expect this in a C-section baby. But I think like mom has done a great job. I think with her breast milk, and her gut health must be in not a bad shape, that we see the kind of the child's gut being already course corrected. And I also know this because they don't have a very high antibiotic resistant index. We did see some bugs, but it's kind of not too bad. And there's a C-section index here, which is kind of what I mentioned from the paper, that I definitely wanted to check in with C-section babies or any babies. Basically not too bad. This is where the 9-month-old with Noah kind of kicked in, and this was the 3 to 6 month range, I think. So slightly different ranges here, but looks like, yeah, the breastfeeding has healed their guts really well. So no concerns here from the NICU or the C-section. I hope this gives you a peace of mind.
It
that
does. I was like,
yeah.
59, is that a D or so I
Yeah,
like,
yeah. There's some, it's to give you tools to work on, right? Like,
yeah.
you can have this plan on hand and have some of these, buy some of these supplements. If you do see signs of constipation or XYZ, you can give it to them. But otherwise, because their results are pretty decent, I wouldn't worry too much, and I would work on the diversification with the foods and allergens, and some of these things. I see you use hand sanitizers still, and harsh chemicals. I would start replacing those if you can. Like find ways to offer fermented foods, things like that. So there's just a lot of resources that may seem like, oh, of course, but like it's something that you can bookmark here to then like, okay, let's just be more conscious about buying more kefir and incorporating that into our kids' lives.
I
So
love
yeah.
it. Thank you, Cheryl. This is so informative. And now I'm like, okay, now this is where I need a health coach here to really go about, getting those foods incorporated. I know we've got a lot of questions. Sandy, I don't know if you want to come on back and see if we can get to some of these, because there's some great great questions here, Sandy.
Yes, well, this has been so informative, and we do have some great questions. Before we begin, I just want to remind everyone that this is not for specific tailored medical or nutritional advice. So even though some questions were about you wanted to know for your own child, that we can't give specific advice, but can provide general education around these issues. Cheryl, I don't know if you can see the questions, perhaps if you went through those. And that is the first one, that he was fully breastfed. She had to stop and supplement for her son, then breastfed again. Then he went back to fully formulated, and that his GI tract's all over the board. What can I do to correct that now that he's over a year old and no longer taking formula?
Yeah, and to echo what Sandra said, this is not a diagnostic test by any means. It's a wellness educational test. We do have disclaimers here, and obviously any recommendation, including supplements and dietary advice, please run it through your pediatrician or your functional practitioner. We advise you to definitely work with someone. Our microbiome specialists are here to guide you on the microbiome piece of it, but it's multifactorial, right? And if you become a practitioner in our network, we offer free training on how to specifically interpret the report. As I walk through all the nuances, we actually offer free training specifically to use this test for in your practice. So for cases like that, I know I mentioned the earlier, the better, the more, the easier the course correction, but really there's no such thing as too late, even if you started at 18 months, or even if your child is 5 years old, 8 years old, and has, a teenager having acne problems, chances are something is off in their gut that you can course correct and rebalance. So like even me, I had one day of diarrhea when I went traveling, and I saw 17% E. coli in my gut from 0. I had none. And I'm now on a healing journey to get that 17% E. coli down to 0 in my gut, which I did. So at any age, you can see what's triggering the symptoms in their guts, and kind of work, this is why I would test, not guess, and kind of have a very specific, personalized guide on what to do next, right? And what to troubleshoot first. So I would highly recommend to check in, given his history, and then hopefully it will lead you to a path where you know what to do next. But again, keeping in mind, this is one part of the puzzle. The gut is a big puzzle piece for sure, but it's one piece to genetics, lifestyle factors, so many things. So hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you. April wants to know about H. pylori. This is her 23-year-old C-section daughter, but anything is that even measured? And yes, okay.
We have this. We really don't see this in kids, probably adults, but it's important to know that I know it has a bad name, but it's actually pretty healthy in the gut if found. So you don't want to actually eradicate it completely if you find some bits of it. But if you do, it also lives in the stomach. So remember, stool testing represents the large intestines. So if you do find, we rarely find H. pylori in the large intestines, and some other PCR tests have been known to over-index on H. pylori. So for adults and grown-ups like your 23-year-old, I would actually there's something called the baking soda test. And then you kind of take it in the morning and see if you burp or not, to really measure the acidity in your stomach. I'm not an expert in it, but I would encourage you to look into it to double check if H. pylori is actually a factor. It's usually linked to stomach acid or a lack of stomach acid. It's a huge topic. So bottom line is we do test for it. And I just want to remind people that it's not bad to see some of it. It's only if it's causing trouble in large amounts.
Okay, and then a question: 6-month-old, not poop, not on solid. So how can you get poop from the diaper to get a good sample, the scraping count? And then how accurate is the test for infants?
if it's not pooping, oh, I mean, they should be pooping. I mean, like,
Yeah, they'd just be breast milk poops, right?
yeah, I mean, if it's kind of watery, you can still kind of get a little bit of sample. And I scraping from that, as long as you just try not to touch the swab to the diaper too much, because you're wanting to get the microbial DNA from the stool. So infants that are not on solids, you mean you should be able to get some solids out of there. Hopefully it's not entirely watery, but yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was able to just, obviously they were doing a little solids, but they were still mostly breastfed, so I was able to get that. So
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm assuming in terms of the accuracy that you're confident, or you wouldn't be you wouldn't be selling
you wouldn't be here.
Oh, no.
Yes.
I mean, I created this for my own kids, right? So we started off the
Yes.
page with 3,000 published papers on infants, mapping that out over time. And then now, I mean, 3,000 samples. Now we have over 55,000 samples. Most of them are infants or kids. Over the 2.5 years we've been around. So we've surpassed even the publicly published data, and we have even more accuracy on what's normal and what's not normal in an infant gut. So yes.
I've got this. I've got a question came in from Jessica that I'm so curious about, because this impacts me. You mentioned reduction in the use of hand sanitizers. Do you mind elaborating on this point? I'm kind of wondering, where do I wash or not wash my 8-month-old hands? And I got to say, with a 5-year-old, I'm like, just get the hand sanitizer. Oh my gosh. So I'm curious if
It's
you could
banned in my
elaborate.
house. I'm sorry, Scott, it's banned in my
I
house.
know.
I mean, hand sanitizers are literally, it kills everything, right? Like, it's kind of
Mhm.
like, to me, that's the antibiotic you're carrying in your little purse. And the thing with a 5-year-old or even a toddler is they put hand sanitizers and then they grab the snacks and eating it. So do you want your infant, your kids actually ingesting hand sanitizers? It gets into their gut, and guess what? It's gonna wipe good germs, bad germs maybe, but also good germs, right? So
Right.
want that. Same thing with your household cleaners. If you have infants crawling on the floor and you're using Clorox, some antibacterial soap is also banned in my household. Anything antibacterial, some formulation, some soaps have triclosan, which is banned in Europe. It can last in your toothpaste or toothbrush and floor for months, even after you stop using it. And that triclosan, for example, an antibacterial, has been shown to wipe out species in the gut. So be very judicious about antibacterial soap and harsh cleaners. We use Branch Basics. It's very clean. I wouldn't, you just have to assume that any kind of sanitization or chemicals your kids are ingesting it, and it could impact their gut and lower diversity. That's what you don't want. So hand wash with soap, I use Dr. Bronner's or Branch Basics. That's kind of clean and no additional chemicals. I would say, like, there are papers showing too, if you are the kind of parent who always clean the pacifiers and you pick it up and clean it. Infants, parents who don't clean the pacifiers have less incidences of allergies. So, the hygiene hypotheses, right? Same thing with pets coming in, bringing dirt and nature in. You actually want that healthy dirt. In an over sanitized environment, you actually see more allergies in the household. You don't want that.
And this is right
I
in the
rinse it
health
off with
coach's
water.
wheelhouse. Yeah, water is good. Yeah, this
Mhm.
is the health coach's wheelhouse to support people on making these changes. So we'll take one more question. Good source. Actually, there were two. One is this test for 3-year-olds, almost 4.
Oh, we have for all ages.
Okay.
It's actually
That's what
the same exact swab. So if you get a swab, it doesn't
Okay.
age. When you activate your kit, the kit ID on our site, and fill out the survey, you fill out your birth date. That's when we personalize your test to the age. So a 4-year-old will have an adult-like microbiome. So it's kind of pegged to an adult microbiome at that point, or range. But the copy of how we talk to you about your action plan will be geared towards a child. The supplements we recommend are age appropriate. So it's important to get the birth date right to activate it.
All right. And let's see, do you guys test to adults as well?
Yes. So
Yes.
same thing with adults. I would say even more importantly, I always kind of mention you shouldn't just think about fixing your child's gut or if there's imbalances, because ultimately they're going to eat what you're eating. They're going to live in the same environment, air and floor, and chemicals that you're living in. So if their guts, at 3 or 5 will mirror your gut as an adult. So even though you might kind of set them up well for the immune training in early life, so to prevent chronic conditions later, their gut's going to look like yours. Right? So I would highly recommend the parents to check in too. And even if someone does not have kids, we have a huge adult population testing just to improve their gut health in general. And there's more and more science. And the beauty about what we do here, because we start from a strong science in the infant gut, the stronger science they're supporting course correction, we are mapping out what are features of a healthy microbiome from infancy to toddlerhood to adulthood. So we actually have, we think, the best stool test for adults too, because we know that trajectory of maturation and what a healthy adult will be.
Well, this has been fascinating. I know I learned a lot. I want to thank you, Cheryl and Scott, and thank the babies. Thank you, Noah. Thank you, Eliza, for participating. And thank you for everybody who attended. We tried to get to most of your questions. I'm sorry if we were unable to answer all of them, but we will be having more of these types of webinars, and I hope you will join us. So this has been absolutely a great presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody.